Thank you, Lorenz. Reeves, whose turn was it to watch Jay today?
No.
I'm sure he'll be showing up here in a little bit. It's my pleasure today to get to introduce the panel of ag producers and Jay to discuss the local perspective on the value and importance of agricultural water. Reeves Brown and his wife Betsy own and operate the 3R Ranch near Beulah, Colorado. It has been my pleasure to get to know Reeves over the last several years, working with him on the Arkansas River Basin Roundtable. Reeves is also a member of the Lower Arkansas Valley Water Conservancy District.
Oh, yes.
Yes.
Sorry. That's how it's going to go today, I guess.
Yeah. Jay Winter, the non-ag guy on the panel, is the general manager of the Lower Arkansas Valley Water Conservancy District. Jay and his board have been very active in the Lower Arkansas Valley at working on alternatives to the buy and dry scenarios for irrigated ag. Michael Haricata is a generational farmer here in Otero County. He and his family raise Rocky Ford cantaloupes, watermelon, honeydew, and pumpkins. Have you guys seen any of the ads of King Soopers on TV? That's Michael Haricata and his family. They're very, very nice ads. Michael was instrumental in the formation of the Rocky Ford Growers Association. Steve Wooten is a generational rancher in Los Animas County. Their family ranch is located about 40 miles south of here as a crow flies. It's a little farther than that driving. It's some of the most beautiful and scenic areas in my opinion, in Colorado. It has the Red Rock Canyons and it's just a wonderful place. As you can see from Steve's bio in the folder, he's been very active in preserving and promoting ag in our area. With this, we will proceed to the panel's presentations. We'll start with Reeves Brown, and the questions will follow. Reeves?
Thanks, Kevin. Well, I need to tell you probably where, as Mike Rosen frequently starts the program, where I sit before I tell you where I stand. And I'm an unabashed and unapologetic supporter of agriculture. My wife and I moved to Colorado in '81. The Arkansas Valley is an intriguing and rewarding place with challenges. And I think anybody that's lived here long and bought into its potential and appreciates its past needs to be involved in preserving it. And I hope from this forum we go forward and do a little more vigorous supporting of how we keep this agriculture viable in the valley. Almost half of the irrigated acres in the Arkansas Valley has been dried up, according to some data I have, and I probably should have checked my figures with Chris Woodcock because he's got all this in his head. I appreciate Chris for what he carries around, but that has created an ag gap, and I want to explain what that is and how it affects us and what the negatives are and how serious that might be, and there's some following economic discussion that I think will be more impressive than what I'm going to present, but I think in philosophical terms we have to deal with this gap. And I'm going to try to do that with what the Colorado Conservation Board, CWCB, did in commissioning the first statewide water initiative. And as you read that, and the second one that came out 5 years later, you see that their emphasis totally was on how to meet the needs of municipal and industrial in the state of Colorado in the year, up to the year 2050. And as that process was studied, determining what the cities and industries have today, that was a baseline zero. They're adequately funded with water. In 2050, they estimated with a fairly sophisticated demographic study that they would all have great gaps or insufficiencies to meet their water demands. So that's where the term gap comes in for the M&I studies. How to meet that gap. Well, there were alternatives created of conservation, as most of you probably know a lot of this, and I hope I won't bore you, but for those of you that haven't seen that, the conservation and ongoing projects, completion of some projects, and then hopefully finding new water. But at the bottom line, agriculture was the default for supplying that gap. And that just rankled a lot of us. And it irritated us that the state thinks so little of our agriculture. So the roundtable fortunately had enough interest to promote some studies on how we attack this. Agriculture's gap, in fact, right now today is about 47% of what it was at the beginning of time, of when we were settled the country. We had so much more water, and of course, that's understandable and acceptable because the population came out, it's a good place to live, and we wanted folks to live in Colorado, and so we lost a lot of water to the beginning in the first half of the 20th century, but it continued. And in fact, this Swazi report says by the average ag loss by 2050 will be 30% more than what it is now. And the irrigated gap today is 47%, as I said. M&I gap will increase 54%. So I don't want to bore you with numbers, but that indicates that M&I is going to continue to grow with no statewide emphasis on somehow limiting that water going from agriculture into more growth in M&I. And I know in the Arkansas Valley, I'd a whole lot rather see more production here and less condominiums, and a lot of those 8-to-5 jobs that it just takes a resource that's irreplaceable and it converts it for eternity. I guess I think you could see that it might reverse, but it's sure not likely. So that one fact indicates that we need to address the fact that people need to appreciate where this food's coming from. And in the future, I know in a forum in '96, Tom Corliss said that by the year 2025, that the United States will consume every bit of the food that it's capable of producing. And that's 25 years short of 2050. So who's going to fill that gap? Do we want more imported food from Brazil and Mexico and where, or do we want to try to stand a little more self-sufficient in that respect? What does this gap increase? Well, in agriculture, the gap is negative. It's already negative. It's not an increase in the gap for like it is the M&I. Their gap's going to get bigger from zero. Our gap is going to get bigger from 47% already lost to maybe 13% more. So we're continuing to go down a road that I think the Valley should be really concerned about, and I know a lot of people are, but we have to do something different and new or some way to change that principle. We have an ally in the governor. We have an ally in John Stoltz, and with John Salazar, and the environment's right. If we can just motivate and get some activity going to make agriculture more important to the population. So Roundtable did something in the effort there. They promoted an ag value workshop and brought economists and experts in from, I think, California, Arizona, and New Mexico, and then an economist for the Farm Family Alliance. And they were very complimentary of what we were trying to do because they said in their states, the same thing's happening is happening throughout the West, and nobody's really taking the leadership to change the tide. Lower Nevada is drying up Lake Mead. You know, there's just a lot of things happening, but they're waiting for the crisis to happen. And if we can be a little more responsible about planning the future rather than taking what comes, we need to be doing that. This idea that the the gap is just inevitable. And it's kind of what it looks like the tack we're on with our water plan unless citizens get more involved. One of the things we can do is, I think, two things, is the roundtable sponsoring these educational meetings across the valley. There's going to be, how many, Jay, like 12 or so in communities?
Yes.
And that's the chance for the citizens to come and have their input in the Colorado Water Plan, or really a Colorado our Arkansas Valley Basin Plan that will go forward and have an influence on the governor's water plan. If enough people in the valley attend those meetings and get the reality of what the future holds, then I think we might have a chance to influence how that plan goes to the governor. And maybe growth won't be that much more superior than food production. That's one thing. I think go to those meetings and see what your input would be. And the other is, well, I want to quote Tom Corliss again. He used in his speech to try to motivate the valley to save its water, comparison with the smart growth plan that Governor Romer had in the 90s. He said, if you let growth just have its way, you'll have 35 acres all over all this ag production land like eastern Pueblo County. And you won't have the kind of design or preservation of your good agriculture food production land unless you plan for it. So that philosophy, I think, is time to revisit. If we as a valley, chambers of commerce, whatever, can go together in one voice and say we appreciate what our agriculture represents to us, we think it ought to be appreciated more in the water plan, listen to us and appreciate that value. And who knows, people respond when the folks get together and speak as one voice. This effort to increase the value or appreciation of the value of agricultural water was undertaken to show that it's not just the production of agriculture value, agriculture production we have. The public enjoys ag water on the rivers it rafts, on the fishing lakes and fishes in the rivers, and with the environmental community concerned about dried rivers or less river flow, wetlands. A lot of ag water supports all that, and the public doesn't think about that value. So we need to highlight that more and get a little more support in the other communities. And I think we have a lot of environmental folks that are in our camp that we can say will support a position of preserving more of that water staying in the river and not going north. So I think that is pretty much wraps up my comments about what the gap represents to us, and we'll hear more about the economic impact from Jay, I think, but it's a special place, and we don't want to lose excuse me, I'm making a lot of noises up here. I hope we don't lose the history, what the history has represented and given us, because once it's taken away, we really won't see the same again. And the Lower Arkansas Valley Conservancy District's mission is to preserve it, as you know. But we're limited in what we can do. We need a lot more. There's water bank potentials. There's other things that don't walk on private property rights, that with a group effort, I think we can make this valley bloom like it is now and hopefully enhance it. Kind of think of what our acre feet represent today with ag commodity prices, what they are. And if we had just half of that 47% that's already gone, how much more our economies would be boosted with jobs and dollars flowing through it. So, hope you think about that.
Thank you. Our next presenter will be Jay Winters, and I think we're going to talk on the statewide ag gap.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you for having me. I really want to thank the people that put this together. Putting these meetings like this together, it's not an easy task. It's very difficult. And whenever you're putting these meetings together, you have many, many speakers. And then you always have somebody that says at the last minute they can't show up. And that's kind of situation here. At the last minute, somebody couldn't show up. And I get this email from Jean, and she says, Jay, I really want to thank you for filling in for this guy that didn't show up. I'm like, I am? So I am the fill-in here today is what I am. What I want to talk about is the agricultural gap for the state of Colorado. It's something that we have had a very, very tough time getting our arms around it. We can get to 14 Colorado rivers very, very quickly, looking at the entire ag gap. In the Arkansas Basin, we decided that we would look at in the Arkansas Basin. I think we got through one meeting is what it ended up happening with. We got to 1 million acre feet very quickly. And the challenge that we had is people saying, well, you get more water in the Arkansas Basin, it's mine. I'm the senior water right, I get first crack at the water. We were having a heck of a time getting past that on who would get the water. So I'm not going to say we punted. We probably just put it on the back burner and tackled some of the problems that we're looking at right now. What we're looking at right now is how do we fill what I want to call the identifiable agricultural gap. Steve Whitty this morning, he did the PowerPoint presentation on looking at Rule 14, Rule 10 plans that are out there. It's something that we've been looking at for quite a while. I may have talked about this a little while yesterday, but there's ways to do it. One way to do it is to make sure we don't increase that gap. And that's by taking more land out of production, more buy and drive agriculture. One way to avoid increasing that gap is to another transmountain diversion. Water that the state of Colorado is entitled to, we need to somehow get that water over here. The more water that we can bring from the west slope to the east slope will be the less agriculture that will be taken out of production. That's one way that we're looking at right now. There's not going to be one silver bullet. There's going to be many, many different things. There's going to be a balancing act. I talk about that balancing act quite a bit. With the new TMD, how do you do it? People are saying you can't take it out of the headwaters anymore. So what we have talked about is using existing infrastructure and adding infrastructure. That can help agriculture if we can ever get that accomplished. Another way that we've looked at filling the ag gap is through leasing fallowing. Can we take bad land out of production and use that water to meet the existing gap? The gap as we know it in the Rule 14 and the Rule 10 plan. When we look at these two plans, we can get to 53,000 acre feet very, very quickly in the Rule 10 plan and the Rule 14 plan. Relying on Mother Nature, relying on Pueblo Board of Water Works, relying on a supplemental water supplies return flows, it's not a very good plan. In fact, you're relying on somebody else to solve your problems. I really appreciate working with the guys in the Fort Lyon. They're really open-minded about how they're going to solve their problems, and their problems on the Rule 10 plan. They understand that the spot market could dry up, or it may get way too expensive for anybody to afford water for the Rule 10 or the Rule 14 plan. So what we've started to do with them is we have 3 paths, 3 ways to get water. Return flows, buy it in the spot market, and we're just now starting to use surface water rights or exploring the use of surface water rights. To use the surface water rights, something we're starting to explore, recharge. On the South Platte, they do recharge very, very well. In the Arkansas, I think Scott Lorenz does recharge very well for Agua. That's about the only one I can think of. So we plan on getting into recharge very heavily in the future. Another thing that we've talked about is the pond study. Can those ponds be used for recharge? Right now, we are getting credits with the water that goes into the ponds. So can they be used? It's stuff that we have been talking about. These can help fill the gap. A study that was done at the state level on the South Platte was crop stressing. They did this on the South Platte about going from a high consumptive use crop to a low consumptive use crop. And then can you take the difference and use that in an M&I system while still keeping agriculture viable? These are all things that we have talked about at the state level so far. Solving this problem is a lot of it's going to be up to the farmers. Farmers can be very innovative. They can be very innovative solving these problems. When we look at leasing fallowing isn't just about getting water to the cities. It's also about farmers solving their own problem. I believe the first group, somebody talked about ag to ag. I think we'll be seeing that because that'll be one way to solve the gap that we have in the Arkansas Basin that I call the identifiable gap. which is Rule 14 and Rule 10 plan. That's what I'm talking about on the gap. Now I want to go a little bit to what Reeves was talking about on the economic study that we did in the Arkansas Basin. This, I don't believe it's been released yet. I had a PowerPoint for it, but I'm not a big fan of PowerPoints. So anyway, what we have found from the economic activities that we have done on this is that irrigated agriculture, this does not include cattle, $695 million a year just in the Arkansas Basin. That's irrigated agriculture with another $38 million in dryland farming. Now we look at what does this create as an economy in the valley. 4,661 jobs is what this creates within the Arkansas Valley. That's why it's important to keep agriculture viable. Then we look at the spillover, the indirect, buying seeds, fertilizer, fuel, etc. The indirect effect to the economy, $317 million is how it affects the economy. What we looked at next was what happens if you start to reduce it. If you do a 17% reduction in irrigated agriculture in the Arkansas Valley, you will lose $174 million of economic impact. Once again, the value of keeping agriculture viable. What does it do to the rest of the areas? This is one of the more interesting ones that I liked about it. Water recreation. What effect does agricultural water have on recreation? You know, Pueblo Reservoir, that's a lot of agricultural water. The water running down the Arkansas, a lot of agricultural water. $222 million a year brings in 2.6 million visitors per year that we get to the state parks, rafting, etc. So it's a big impact on the economy with people riding on agricultural water. If we start reducing those numbers, is an impact, gotta find my paperwork here. If we have a 10% reduction, it's an impact of $34 million for the recreational part of the economy within the Arkansas Basin. So it's a study that we did. I'm hoping that we get this out and we're able to, I think it's still looking at peer review through CSU so everybody can look at it. It's a very interesting study that we've done. So anyway, I'll take any questions as we get to the end, and that's the world according to the fill-in speaker. Thank you.
Thank you, Jay. Our next presenter will be Michael Haricata, a local producer, and he's going to talk about the perspective of heritage and agriculture. Michael?
Thank you. I'd like to thank everybody for showing up to listen to me. I'm a simple country boy, and when I was approached to do this, I thought it was an ag classroom of 15 kids. I never got an email saying 200, 120. Thank you, Shelley Simmons. You need to call Lane because you have a flat tire. But anyway, I'm going to talk about the heritage of farming and how it all ties into water. This is a picture of a display at Safeway in Boulder. Now, I've been to several meet and greets with King Soopers and Safeway, and you always run into somebody that says, I know your dad, I know your grandma, I know the Knapps, I know the Proctors. And they're very proud of what we have done with the cantaloupe. And you know, our name's right on the box, and they're proud of this. The people who are from this valley, they consider us part of their family. And when you think of water, you know, you think of drinking, and you want to clean yourself. Hopefully you clean yourself. You irrigate your lawn, and it's very thirst quenching. But it's one thing we cannot live without. We think we can't live without our cell phones, but water is absolutely imperative to the survival of this planet. And my journey starts 6,000 miles away over 125 years ago in Japan. In Fukushima, Japan, Tsunosuke Harikata made the long journey from Japan to Colorado, 6,000 miles, because he learned that in Colorado, in Rocky Ford, Colorado, they were friendly to Japanese people, and he could farm, he could do what he loved. And that started everything. And then here we are today. This is a few years ago, but generations. I am the 4th generation farmer, and the 5th generation is standing there with us. And I feel that I owe it to my ancestors, to my great-grandfather and my grandfather, to keep farming going strong, to protect the water, and to do all I can to be a good steward of the land in the Arkansas Valley. I think Reeves put it right, it's a great place to live. It's open spaces, you know, you can, in the summertime when you drive by a cantaloupe field, you actually smell the sweet. Where else can you say that? But Rocky Ford, Lahana, Otero County. And the value of ag water. You know, sometimes when the wind's blowing 100 miles an hour, all the farmers here know it. It's in your eyes, it's in your teeth. You think, I'm gonna sell. Because, you know, the fertilizer prices are going up, fuel's going up, seed, labor, regulations. But there will be a negative impact on the economy. All you have to do is take a drive 22 miles that way to Ordway, and you will see what happens when the water leaves the valley. When the wind blows, you see the dust coming. You can actually see it coming. And, you know, that makes me I never want to sell my water because of that fact. It's a sad situation when a windstorm comes, it calms down, but yet there's a haze and there's not a cloud in the sky and it's dust. And it's not a pretty sight. So the other side of that is to keep the water. The tradition, legacy, heritage. We've been farming here since 1915, and I am proud, so proud to be in Colorado, Rocky Ford, Otero County. I can farm with my dad, my cousin, my kids. Every day I get to see them. I have meaningful dialogue. We eat lunch together. I could take my kids to school every day, and this is a job. This is one of the few jobs that you can do that, and it's because of the water that we have in this valley. Water, or keeping farming, will stop a dying community, but we have to fight hard for what we believe in. Jay, Reeves, you know, they hit it on the head. It's worth fighting for, and you know, it will limit the dust storms. Like I said before, we are good stewards of farm ground. We have become a little bit better. We're better stewards. I lost my train of thought. Sorry about that. And the farm community. John Knapp is here, Frank Malinsky, and that's just a small sample, but we are all good friends. If anything happens, we're a phone call away from help and a positive impact on the economy. Jay's numbers are way better than mine. I really like those numbers. My numbers will be coming up here. Oh no, I guess not. This is how we get our water. As soon as we get our harvest done, we pray for snow. Then in the springtime, it melts and it comes down our canal delivery system. That's the Catlin Canal right there. And then here's a little sample of how we get our well water. I think the engineers explained it way better than I did, so this is just an example. We belong to Well Association, but in the last 10 to 12 years, we haven't had very much water. So we had to augment our shares through augmentation station so we can replace the water that we pump out of the ground. And here's an example of some of our drip tape where we pump our groundwater into the subsurface irrigation. And you know, we're putting plastic down right there, and it's you know, it saves on the weed pressure, or helps with the weed pressure, and it helps with fruit quality. And here's a little example of our flow chart here, our flow. It all starts with water, and then we go to the field, and then it ends up on the consumer's table. And I tell you what those things say, but I can't see that far. And here's an example of our economic impact. Cantaloupe, we had 330 acres and generated, with the multiplier from Mike Bartolo, $11.5 million. The watermelons created $4.3 million. The pumpkins, almost $1 million, and the honeydew, 176,000. And you can see that's not very many acres. And it's a small percentage of ag that's in this valley, a very small percentage. And here's the multiplier that I did get from Mike. And here's the total of acres. You can see there are 820 acres created $16.9 million. And that is a very small percentage of the 1 to 2% people who farm in the United States. There are actually more people in prison than there are farmers now. And here's an example of the farming community. There's the Knapps on the left, the Lusks on the right, Hannigans, and Proctors. Now, you can't see Brian Knapp, but he goes to Florida in the wintertime. And if I had a flat tire and a driving snow, he would drive up and help me, or he would send his kids. But Brian and I, we're pretty tight, but there have been a lot of F words said between us. But I consider him part of my family because we work so closely together, and it all starts with water. Water is the key ingredient to all of this brotherhood, I guess you would say. There's Eric. And this is kind of a list of our farming community here. And the guys on the right, a bunch of those are from Pueblo, and they grow a lot of pumpkins for Heracata Farms. And it's just a small example of what water can do and what we can do and what kind of economic and positive family impact we can have on our community. And that was quick and sweet, so I thank you for your time.
Gene's going to come up for a moment and switch the PowerPoints for us. And our next presenter will be Steve Wooten, who is a local rancher south of town here. And Steve's going to cover the working landscapes of the Arkansas Valley. Thank you, Gene.
Well, most of the time you say in a situation you're like a fish out of water, and I really am. I'm the drylander on the panel here. We're, like Kevin said, about 40 miles southwest of here, and in 2006 and 2007, my uncle and I drilled 3 new wells for pipeline supply to our livestock. One well was 16 gallon a minute rated, the other 2 were closer to 20. And between the 2 ranches, we've got in excess of 40 miles of pipeline. There's one stretch of our pipeline that serves our north end that's 20 miles straight. If we're having to push water that far, it's 20 miles through an 1.25-inch line. Today, 2 of the wells are still in production at 3 gallon a minute restricted and 5 gallon a minute restricted, yet we're still trying to supply water to 700 head of cows. So this drought has really struck us hard in terms of our groundwater supply. Water is essential, whether it's in the farming environment and in this valley, or if it's us out there on the plains trying to get a better grazing pattern and using technology like pipelines, steel rim tanks to distribute water and then distribute our cattle across the ranch. We were talking earlier in the foyer about the threats and what makes us want to be advocates for agriculture, and we were reminiscing about the previous generation and even 2 generations back. I started working with my grandmother when I was fresh out of high school on the ranch, and we didn't have the conversations and we didn't attend seminars like this. We pretty much stayed on the ranch and worked day to day and delivered a crop in the fall. And one of the things we talked about is in the biggest change has been the environmental community. Reeves was sharing that in the 1980s, when the Cattlemen's Association was talking about introducing a land trust or beginning to have conversations with the Nature Conservancy or Sierra Club or others, that it just didn't happen. Both groups were as far apart and as diametrically opposed as they could possibly be. And today, it's different. They've come and met us at the middle and beginning to understand we're relevant and we're the answer to the solutions they were seeking in the 80s, but they were misguided. It's branding season out there, and it's a wonderful time. It's a source of renewal. As much as it is this year seeing some semblance of green grass in those parched pastures, it's that renewal period that gives you the energy to drive on through the next part of the season. And you'll be out there, and I love seeing the operations that are family-oriented. And it's all over the region, all over southeast Colorado, eastern Colorado, New Mexico, Texas. 4-year-olds are on their horse. 6-year-olds are getting a chance to maybe rope 1 calf out of the pen. There's 25 head of calves in there, and they're in there 20 minutes while we're taking a coffee break. And somebody go, he roped it. And then everybody runs to help him get the calf. But it's that succession that's taking place. It's fun in the branding pen. It's those, I take my 6-year-old out when I'm doing my monitoring for CSP and for just our own data that we collect in our monitoring process. And we'll go down that 200-foot tape, and he drops the needle, and we record whether we hit grass, soil, or litter. But it's that anecdotal training that's taken place, and I love seeing it, that it still exists out there. We're doing it with fewer young people in our communities, but it still exists today like it did in the 1870s when my family came from Ireland. In November of 2006, the Central Shortgrass Prairie Ecoregional Assessment and Partnership Initiative published their final report on the Central Shortgrass Prairie ecoregion. This region encompasses 56 million acres and includes all of eastern Colorado, as well as portions of neighboring states. Today, more than 50% of the ecoregion remains in intact native prairie, a sound testament to the stewardship and commitment to the region's 90% owners, private owners, the farmers and ranchers. That other 10% involves the footprint of cities, the state land board, which is in agriculture production and for the most part native prairie, and then some other ownership in there, but for the most part it's all in productive agriculture. The members of the Shortgrass Prairie Partnership believe that these special places should remain intact for present and future generations. And I was making reference to the environmental groups. That board, of which I am a member of, is comprised in majority of those environmental groups: the Nature Conservancy, Rocky Mountain Bird Observatory, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Partners. Boy, this is a tough one for me to say too, Kevin. And the Defense Department. But even the Defense Department has a stake in what takes place in an ecoregion the size of this, with its importance to agriculture and the communities as this. In the fall of 2005, the citizens of Southeast Colorado heard about a plan by the military to expand the current Pinyon Canyon Maneuver Site from its existing 238,000 acres to well over 5 million acres over a 20-year plan. That would have taken almost a quarter of the state of Colorado, the southeast quarter, and taken it out of its current ownership and its value that you've spent days discussing, and placed it as a military defense training site. The Pinyon Canyon Maneuver Site was established in 1983 with approximately half of its acres by fee purchase. We believe there's a little bit of collusion involved in that, but nonetheless that was fee purchase, and the remaining acres were by condemnation. That act was and still is the largest act of condemnation by the United States government on private citizens in history. Those of us that worked in the NEPA process in the 80s came to realize that once you get to the environmental impact study, you're relegated to the back pages of the document as a yes comment or a no comment. Despite the volumes of evidence that you can put in their hands, you sit on one side or the other, opposed or in favor of the action in the environmental impact study. So when this threat came around, we decided, let's be proactive. Let's go out and do a study on the biological inventory and the historical archaeological inventory in southeast Colorado. We employed the services of the Colorado Natural Heritage Program up at CSU to do our biological environmental study, and we employed the services of Colorado Preservation Inc. and the National Trust for Historic Preservation to conduct the archaeological historical study. The ranchers really put their necks on the line. We told them no holds barred. You come look, you evaluate, you write your summary, and what you say we're going to live with. We felt like we understood that we were sustainable. We read from our cattle what our range is doing. We monitor our range, so we feel like our cattle are hitting the target numbers we want, 95% conception rate, 97% live calf crop brought in spring. We're hitting those numbers, but we're also seeing abundant wildlife. We're seeing a workable soil mineral water cycle with insects on the ground and dung beetles out in the pastures, lots of flora and fauna, but no scientific data. That was all anecdotal, and we'd seen what that gets you in an EIS. It gets you the back page. So we turned them loose. We had some rather interesting public meetings when we first walked out to these very reserved ranchers and said, how about opening up your ranch to letting scientists take a look at it? And at Aguilar, I thought we were going to be tarred and feathered. But Rene Rondeau and Ed Warner started talking. And they started telling them, look, this is your study. It's going to be proprietary to you. We've accepted the parameters that this data can only be accessed by the highest level of scientific community with justifiable reason to access the data. Your privacy is protected. Unprecedented for them to give that level back to the ranchers so they had a comfort level. Results of the survey confirmed that there are incredible areas of high biodiversity in southeast Colorado. A typical county level field study will yield approximately 70, 80 elemental occurrence records for plants, animals, and natural communities. And of those, a third are typically new and 2/3 are repeats. In contrast to the Southeast Colorado study, it yielded 150 elemental occurrences, of which 131 were new and only 19 were repeats. Rene Rondeau, the 2000 director of the Colorado Natural Heritage Program, was working on the J.E. Canyon Ranch the first week of the study, and she made this statement that it's Colorado's best kept secret that the largest, most intact wilderness area is in the hands of private individuals. The numbers of plants and communities that they found, and a community is like a soil-barren sagebrush or a juniper shale-barren community with needle and thread, New Mexico feather grasses in it. Those are communities. They might be several thousand acres, they might be 10,000 acres. What this unprecedented study showed us, I'm getting behind here, I think. What this unprecedented study of 1 million acres showed us is that the agrarian society is utilizing its resources in a prudent yet productive and sustainable manner. It's resilient to outside factors such as market fluctuation and economic downturns. The regions of Colorado that utilize natural resources and conversion of sideline into food suffered far less in the recent economic downturns than the Front Range. Southeast Colorado has and always will continue to utilize our assets to support economic growth and in a way that maintains our cultural identity and our ecological base. After 8 years, Southern Colorado has prevailed, and in an unprecedented format, the U.S. Defense Department rescinded the waiver that granted Pinyon Canyon Mineral the right to expand, and we thank everybody here and across the state of Colorado that played some large or small part in making that success so that we remain intact. This study, when put in the hands of Congressman Salazar, Mellon, Musgrave, our senators, proved beneficial to having quantifiable data in Washington to say this is why it's best used as agriculture. Farmers and ranchers and their land and water can survive drought, market uncertainty, and nuances of society. The most challenging threat to Colorado agriculture is none of these. I was thinking about the boards that I serve on and what is common in conversation and issues, whether it's Colorado Cooperation, the Pinyon Canyon Expansion Board, or Colorado Cattlemen's. And it comes in the form of political activism and discrimination right now. It's a key issue at every board meeting. There are 8 initiatives right now that may be on the ballot in Colorado this November that affect production agriculture. A Kansas rancher, Mike Calicrate, has moved his permanent residence into Colorado in order to become a co-sponsor of 6 of these initiatives that affect animal production. The Humane Society of the United States is pushing and funding these initiatives with Mike. Now, Mike's operation is still in Kansas, where he produces a niche market of red Angus beef that's marketed in the Front Range region as Ranchway Direct Foods. I have no problem with developing niche markets and doing something that gives value added to your product. However, when you begin to tear down my fellow members of my industry, you've crossed that line. Well, Mike is motivated by that. The Humane Society is motivated to their mission of abolishing meat animal protein in the United States. In 2012, the ag groups in Colorado collectively were able to convince the pollsters and the authors of the initiatives that they weren't polling good enough. In order for an initiative to probably make it to the ballot, the sponsors need to feel like they have about a 60% approval in polling. At that time, they were in the 30s. Some of these polls this year are exceeding the 30s, and I hope that they don't get into that 60% range, because if they do, we will see them on the ballot. Why is this happening? It has to do with our Constitution in the state of Colorado. It is one of only 13 state constitutions that is its original document. So many of our states have given up trying to fix or utilize their Constitution. They attempted to rewrite the Constitution. Very few of them said it was a successful endeavor. In Colorado, ours is one of the easiest to amend. It takes 50% of the vote plus one vote. So we will continue to see outside money and groups working in Colorado to affect social change through our Constitution. Many of the groups in Colorado are trying to get their hands on this. There are possibilities of increased number, percentage, a 66 or 75% vote to change the Constitution, or equal distribution of the ability of signatures on petitions. Right now, I don't think any of us has seen Mike Calicrate or HSUS asking us to sign their petitions. I would guess they're working in Boulder and Summit County for the most part for those petition signatures. Another group that is giving us a lot of trouble is the Environmental Working Group. They lobby aggressively against production agriculture. They paint anybody that's not a backyard farmer or rancher as a corporate and therefore an evil part of the food chain. They brought you the cell phones cause brain cancer. They also brought you that autism is caused by childhood vaccinations, both of which have been refuted by the American Medical Society as false statements. I want to go over some of the initiatives that we see as headline initiatives. The bovine tail docking, you'll find them under initiatives number 99 and 100, and they seem innocent on the surface. Why would it be so bad to not alter the switch off of a cow, and especially in a dairy situation where it is a pathogen for bacteria into the milking barn? What it is it's the first step to a long step of beginning to take management practices away from ag producers. That one has been introduced both constitutionally and statutorily. The dairy cattle protection has been introduced both constitutionally and statutorily. And this is kind of a shotgun approach that if you put enough on both sides of it, maybe one of them will pass. Maybe you lose the constitutional one, but you get the statutory one. This one's similar to the bovine cattle tail docking, but it also prohibits the confinement of dairy cattle. It seeks to put parameters on the size of the stanchion and the ability of the animal to move around in the dairy barn. But it's also redundant in that it prohibits the transportation of non-ambulatory cattle, and it also makes it illegal to receive non-ambulatory cattle. That's already a standard in the industry. We don't need litigation. We don't need a constitutional amendment to do what the industry is already policing itself to do. Care of livestock is a statutory amendment, and this one I think could be the most problematic of them all, because there is a status called an affirmative defense. And if you're called into court, if a plaintiff files against you, and in the briefings that you claim my process of knife castration on calves is accepted as an industry standard, I have an affirmative defense. In most cases, the plaintiff isn't rewarded a time in court. This initiative repeals that affirmative defense, which means the HSUS or a plaintiff driving by your pasture and you've just moved your cattle into a new pasture, you've put 250 head of cattle on 10 acres, you're going to be there for 10 hours and you're going to be gone, but the plaintiff doesn't understand, they can sue because you were confining those cattle, you were making those cattle uncomfortable, they were in a congested environment, there was no feed under their feet, and you don't have the right to say that's an affirmative defense, it's an accepted grazing management practice, or castration is an accepted practice for the management of bull calves. They take that away from you. it will just make the court system flooded with lawsuits regardless of plaintiff knowledge. An additional one to the affirmative defense is the protection and prevention of cruelty to livestock animals. Again, another one with private property rights implication, and the amount of litigation that will be put on agriculture is phenomenal. There are some others that the groups are monitoring: the labeling of genetically modified foods, number 48, public trust doctrines, constitutional number 103, and the environmental rights, a constitutional amendment 115, and at least 9 initiatives at this point that affect oil and gas production in Colorado. The citizens of the Arkansas River Basin and its associated region can indeed be sustainable and create economic growth from the production of food and its associated industries. What we cannot survive is social attacks to our food supply and our culture, our ethics by entities and forces from outside of Colorado's borders. DU conducted a study, and it's a relevant study to how we might go about as people discussing how we fix the initiative process in Colorado. It suggests the additional signatures. It weighed the possibility of passing supermajority, and it's a really good study. I want to take a minute and thank a partner on this who couldn't be here today, and that's Grady Grissom. He's up advocating with Rocky Mountain Bird Observatory in meetings in Denver, and he was an instrumental part of helping put this together, and he's been a partner for 8 years. And I missed him today, but I wanted to let you know that he was a part of it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Steve. Now we'll open it up for questions.
I just want to say that I appreciate Reeves' comment about, because all day yesterday I kept thinking, just because these other areas, their population is exploding, why should it mean that they have to take resources from others, you know? But if they've got a big enough pocketbook, that seems to be what happens. So I had never heard of this smart growth plan. Was that Governor Romer? Is that what he said?
Yeah,
Well,
early
maybe
90s.
I think that's something that really should be looked into.
Do you have any comments on that, Reeves?
What oil? Oh, thank you. That came about because of the breakup of a lot of rangeland, the 35-acre developments, and a lot of counties weren't using their planning and zoning to protect their agricultural production. And I think Governor Romer initiated that, and it took some real positive things, and I bet Dominic can elaborate a lot more on that, but it affected Pueblo County positively. And the point was, plan your future, whether it's a child you're raising, give them some kind of a goal or some kind of something to aspire to, and if you transcend that into a planning for a valley, you wind up with something that may take work and long planning, but nothing comes easy if it's worthwhile sometimes. And so Tom Corliss was the Secretary of Agriculture, Commissioner of Agriculture then, and he used that as a very strong argument to plan in the Arkansas Valley, because we were losing this, I think I said 5,000 acres a year average. So we haven't stopped that yet either. So that's, and I would say quite quick one more thing. Conservation easement is a tool that's very positive if they're well used. And I know we use them on our ranch to preserve the water tied to the ranch, tied to the future of the production. And I think right now it's something that we really ought to look at with a lot more objectivity than emotion. So.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
How much does the rural development and agriculture get involved in supporting farmers in this legislation?
Michael? Oh, the question was how much involvement is rural development in agriculture?
USDA getting involved to support the farmers and the ranchers when legislation is brought up.
our experience in the past has been government agency is almost prohibited from getting involved in the process of supporting and publicly taking a position on issues like the initiative process or the debate between animal welfare and husbandry practices. It may be a bit of a source of a frustration that we can't get Secretary Vilsack to take a stand and be very vocal in supporting production practices. But even in our battle with the Army, with asking the U.S. Forest Service and other bureaucracies to oppose another bureaucracy, they said they're prohibited.
Any other comments from the panel?
I know the Colorado Department of Ag is really fighting some of these initiatives. The tail docking, it's attacking the animal husbandry, that all the ranchers have had good practices over years. And if they pass that initiative on tail docking, where's it gonna stop? So that's why we've got to stand behind Steve and back him on this initiative, because pretty soon you won't be able to vaccinate your dog because it's causing him pain. So if they go there, it's just going to trickle down the system. But the Department of Ag has really tried to back producers on that tail docking issue.
So what kind of grassroots level support from citizens and municipalities can help?
Yeah, it's getting in touch with Kevin Grantham and Clarice Nero-Ratcliffe. It's writing letters to our Washington delegation. It's writing letters of support to Commissioner Salazar and to the governor.
Larry Crowder.
Yep. Get those letters of support out there, and then it's going to take some of the major groups in Colorado, like Colorado Forum, Colorado Cooperation, the ag groups, to push hard to build the base so that this issue can finally come to, it's got to come to a vote of the citizens, however it gets changed, whether it's petition signatures equally from all congressional districts or it gets changed as a supermajority vote. But that build up to the point where you finally put it in front of the citizens to vote on, it starts here with us saying, do it, and do it now.
Kevin,
Yes, sir.
I want to reemphasize one thing. I said it kind of quickly a while ago, but can you imagine how much force and power if all the communities along the Arkansas River came together and formed a body that fought for agricultural water? I think that you get the attention of everybody, every legislator. You just go so much farther than piecemealing the challenge. And if the communities want to be leaders, if the people's benefit in their sites, then the long-range planning requires, I think, some type of an effort like that. We're not getting it done, So.
Okay. Yes, ma'am.
I feel we have to stick together because we're a minority. The cities have more money, more people, more votes. So all of us have to stick together as a minority or we will lose it all.
Okay. Yes.
HSUS will pick this apart if we don't watch it. So we've got all dairy, cattlemen's association, anything with ag has got to stick together against these big conglomerates.
Yes, ma'am.
Has anyone put together a prospectus of some sort about what would happen to our communities if the agricultural water is taken away, how the incomes would be affected, how poverty rise? I mean, so we can put that out there in the press and really push on that.
You can go to CWCB's website. We did 2 different studies, tipping point study. At what point, how much agriculture is taken out of production, how many jobs you lose. So that study has been done.
And Jay,
But it's not just those jobs that would be lost. It's just so much more than that.
The trickle. It
Yes.
shows, if you take agriculture out of production, you're going to lose X number of farming jobs, you're going to lose 2 waitresses' jobs, you're going to lose 1 bank, etc. So yeah,
is that the study you were reading from, or is that?
No, this is one that we just got done, and what this one, the study that we wanted to see was the value of agricultural water. It's really hard to get your arms around it because I wish we would have showed a film that we had that John Stolp did. It started off, we used it in Water 2012, it started off with a guy skiing, and then it goes from skiing down to rafting, to fly fishing, to flat water recreation, to irrigated agriculture, to the farmer's market. And it showed the many uses that we have of water. So what we're trying to do with this study is show what the other economic benefits are besides just irrigated agriculture and what those crops will bring. What's the value to rafting industry? What's the value to flat water recreation? What's the value to fly fishing? So that's what this study's about. And I'm not an economist, and this was done by an economist, so that's why I didn't really want to roll it out, because I get asked questions, I'd be going, well, I'm not an economist, I don't want to try to be an economist, so hopefully it gets rolled out soon. But the tipping point study is on CWCB's website.
Yes, we have a question in the back.
Still is all in the communication and how we're going to get it out to folks. We can continue to try education with the kids and start young and go up to colleges. But right now, we have to communicate how does water affect you in your life? Because a lot of people don't know. Someone else brought this up in another water meeting. There was a gentleman who spoke, and he said that there was in Loveland, and the person called the Loveland Water Department and said, "You've got to fill up the reservoir. I have company coming, and it looks horrible." And he said, "Ma'am, those were used for the water was used for the aggregators." And she said, "Well, how does that affect me?" And he said, "Well, don't you buy, your produce, from the farmer's market and from your grocery store?" And she said, "No, I get it from King Soopers." I mean, she had no idea, but it's just about communication.
Yes, Peter.
Mr. Ruth addressed briefly the threats from the environmental community on a host of things. I'd like a little bit of conversation about the threat to the prior appropriation doctrine that is an ongoing threat. People trying to change it to benefit environmental concerns.
Okay, and who'd you ask to address that?
Do you have some thoughts on it?
Well, it's a threat against the historical priority of water ownership. The public trust doctrine says that we're going to do away with all those priorities of who owns water and where, and it will become a decision of the people of Colorado as to what's the highest and best use. And if it happens to be bluegrass sod in Loveland, and they vote that way, then agriculture gets dried up. You're right, it is a very dangerous road to go down, where we're going to decide at whim where assets are placed in Colorado, not just water, but land use, air, and everything else.
Yes, sir.
Expand on that just a minute. Our expert from California that came to the Ag Value Conference told us a frightful story about the city of Los Angeles owning the water in a lake. And I wish I could remember the name of it, but it owned the lake, basically, and all the water. And there was a drought, and the lake began to dry up, and this lake was a migratory, and the word from where birds nest. Anyway, there was just lots of waterfowl there, and as it dried up, it divided. Well, the water receded. It let a peninsula from the land go out to this island that was in the middle of the lake. And of course, all the birds moved all over to the coyotes and skunks and things, and they began to eat all the nests. Well, the public trust doctrine in California allowed the private property right of Los Angeles owning that water to be overturned, and they had to put water or quit taking water out of that lake and pump water in it so they could preserve the birds. Estuary, that's what it was. And so, as Steve said, all things are upside down when the public trust doctrine can come in and step on your rights.
Okay. Yes, ma'am.
My name is Fiona Smith. I work with the Colorado Water Congress, and in response to that, the Water Congress has a project right now called the Colorado Water Stewardship Project, and the specific purpose of that is to monitor public trust doctrine initiatives and disseminate information about them. So I have a bunch of it on the table in the back, but so you can look there or come up and ask me or ask Jim. He sits on our board. Lots of information about it.
Okay.
What's the website?
It's www.cowaterstewardship.com.
Okay. Yes, ma'am.
And I was just wondering, Jay, if that report has been released to the press.
This one, not yet. And I'm trying to get more information on it, I just gotta get hold of Reagan Waskin on it. When I leave here, I'll give a copy of it to Chris, because he'll get it from me anyway. But,
I know how to reach you.
well, with the public trust doctrine, if that thing passes, 80% of the water attorneys live in the state of Colorado. If that thing passes, you will have every water attorney camping out on the steps of the courthouse filing injunctions immediately. So, I wouldn't get too worried about it.
Yes, I am.
You mentioned the issue of our children staying and being farmers and ranchers. So, I know you have 4-H and, you're future farmers. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Future
Speak
farmers.
up a little bit, please.
So, I want to know some of your ideas to keep our kids farming.
Well, we're as transparent as we can be, and we offer tours, and it says all the kids are on social media, so we have the Twitter and Facebook and all that. So.
Pardon?
You need to turn it on, Kevin.
Repeat it for me. Don't turn it on.
Other ways to incentivize our children to stay and farm.
Well, you got to educate them. We have to educate our children, educate them in the school. Last year, we offered a tour to some inner city kids to come down and view our facility and tour the farms. They toured our farm and the Hannigan farm. And then we're as transparent as we can be, and then we put ourselves on the social media with Twitter, Facebook, and a website. So that's a start. And then last year we were in a farm to fork program where we were one of the featured farms for the Jefferson County school system, and they served our cantaloupe while they were in season. But it had a couple paragraphs about our farm and the history of our farm, so the kids could actually see where their food came from. And we tried to educate them the best as we could, and told them how the actual product got to them. That's what we're trying to do.
I think one of the things that's challenging to keeping young people, our children, and we have the blessing of our younger daughter and son-in-law on the ranch with us, and then their 2 sons are there. So the 5th and 6th generation the 5th looks like I've got them hooked. But the boys, at this point, I think our operation has shifted to making sure there's an opportunity. South of here in Los Animas County, and I think in portions of Baca County, and I'm sure up here, in the last 5 years, land values have exploded in fragmentation, and it's because of the drought. I think the droughts are the driving force. I know of individuals east of Trinidad that haven't had a cow on their ranch for 4 years. And there were tax incentives to how you could avoid capital gains tax until the drought breaks, and then use that funding to get back in the cattle business. But after 4 years of not an animal on the place, and they weren't able to, it wasn't like they could shift over to a stocker operation and stock it. There hasn't been grass out east of Trinidad to put cows on in that period of time. So that makes you change your plan and get into that capital reserve that was once your buyback into it. And then comes the opportunity with Hayden Outfitters of Cabela's that, hey, shave off about 2,000, 3,000 acres, call it an elk property, and I can sell it for $1,000 an acre. When the appraised value of that open range grassland and some of that timber country was $200 to $250 an acre 5 years ago. And this fragmentation that's occurring down there has already put a lot of the larger scale ranches, 10 to 20,000 acre ranches, up over $350 an acre in appraised value. And there isn't a banker in the valley in northern New Mexico that can loan against cattle, even if you dual enterprise with ranching and hunting and consumable resources like harvesting timber, it won't cash flow. And so what's a young person going to look at and say, well, mom and dad have just swept buckets, they've lived like paupers for years. It's a great lifestyle, it's a great place to raise your kids, but the real challenge is, how do we make that succession take place? Reeves offered a tool. You reduce the value of those ranches with conservation easements so that you take some of that off the top, and now the children have a chance either to have it passed forward with minimal capital gains against that pass forward, or it's maybe back into an affordable situation where they can buy their parents out. But I think the sustaining of your children is about your own passion. Do you love it? Are you passionate about it on a daily basis? Do you show them all the benefits of days spent out horseback, days spent out monitoring? Yeah, nobody likes to build fence, but it's one of those jobs we have to do, but then that's rewarding in itself. And I think that economic side is the challenge that's facing us harder versus the allure of rich wealth by moving out of the agrarian society where it takes a lifetime if you ever achieve wealth, but you have a wealth of a lifetime.
Hopefully, one of the days in the near future, we're fixing water gaps. Reese, did you have any comments on that? Good?
Yeah, we welcome water gap fixing.
Yes.
You know, we all decry regulation in government. Are we on? I'm on.
Yeah, it's on
We all complain and sure don't want more government restrictions on our operations, isn't it? I think we've gone way too far on lots of them. But some overcrowded countries have learned that they're going to preserve their agriculture production and the lifestyle and the landscape, they're going to have to zone it. And I don't really want to live in that kind of environment, I think, but I do love agriculture more. And I'd love to see that appreciation carried on for the next century and farther. And that's what led us to the conservation easement issue. That tool works that way. And unless we depend on our counties to zone agriculture production and limit people's profits from land sales, which would be very contentious, we're going to lose it unless we come up with some alternatives in water banks or land banks or things like that that can, on the free market, buy that land when it's on sale. Might be a solution, but yeah, we're just living in a different era, and we're going to have to turn loose some of our prejudices, I think, to survive and gain and keep the cherished part that we want to preserve. So it's not easy.
No, it is not.
Ken?
Yes, Steve.
I know Dwight's sitting over there, he was, and I think sometimes I'm a thorn in his side, but we get a lot of good things done together. The capital gains. If the federal government really, really believes that agriculture is a driving economy in this nation and that we're going to continue to be as productive as we are and where we have to be by 2050 on less arable ground with a greater population globally, in order to get these ranches and farms passed through, if it remains in the family business, it needs to pass through without capital gains. It needs to be a business that has succession, it's non-regulatory, but it makes a business sustainable.
Okay. Are there any questions? Seeing none, if you would help me thank the panel.